Kristi Riordan is from the Flatiron School, which is the world's first, or the US's first?
I think the world.
The world's first coding boot camp based in New York City, recently purchased by WeWork and scaling through that avenue. And Chok is the founder of Kenzie Academy, which is a very interesting mission-driven coding academy based in Indianapolis and entirely geared towards building the tech infrastructure of the Midwest. So thank you for joining, and I'd love to hear a little bit about the unique aspects of your organizations.
Sure, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So thanks for inviting me. Really excited to be here in New York today. Flatiron School started 7 years ago, and at the time it was a really, really crazy idea that we could take someone who had a background in retail. We've had folks who were running the cheese counter at Whole Foods. We've had people who were personal trainers, every possible kind of background that you could think of, and retrain them really rapidly in a very immersive format to be skills ready to become a software engineer, which is an incredibly well-paying job today. So we started doing it, and we had to beg, borrow, and steal to friends of our network to get people to interview. But at the time, young startups couldn't find technical talent, so they began hiring these individuals, and it worked. And gradually, the word of mouth grew. More people enrolled in our program, and more people were hiring our program. And over time in New York City, this became a known reskilling model. And today, we have joined WeWork for about a year and a half, so we've now scaled this program to 10 different cities around the US and in London. And our programs take 15 weeks in person. They take 6 months or 12 months if it's online, which is a great option for areas like this where we don't have a physical presence. And we reskill people into software engineering, data science, and UX, UI design. And a little bit on our outcomes, our graduates have a 98% placement rate within 6 months, and the average salary in New York City is $74,000. Nationally, we see about $65,000. And we're so confident in our ability to achieve these outcomes that we put a money-back guarantee on our programs. If you buy an iPhone and it doesn't work, you'd expect to get your money back. But when we go to college and we expect to get a job, we don't have that same expectation, and we think it's time to raise the standard. So if we don't get our graduates a job within 6 months, we give them their tuition back.
Fantastic. Chok, I'd love to hear a little bit about you.
So we started Kenzie Academy in 2017, and the goal is very, very similar to the Flatiron School. Is how do we, create a new model of education where we can train up non-traditional students, and then be able, when you have a big pool of talent, make places where we focus on, which is the middle of the country, attractive to companies in the coast looking to open up HQ2s in places like Indianapolis, Detroit, Kansas City, Nashville, etc. But also, how do we create enough talent that local companies can start there and thrive there, and no longer have to move to Silicon Valley when they reach a certain stage. So what we're trying to do is bring Silicon Valley to the middle of the country, but localize it for what works for the community. So not just blindly copying and pasting Silicon Valley. And with that, our programs are very designed towards the demographic and the people we want to serve in Middle America. So one difference from the Flatiron School is our programs are generally 1 to 2 years in length, so they're a lot longer. But there is also some element of individualized learning as well. So if you have a lot of social capital, you've been to college prior, you can probably complete our program in a lot less time. So we see people graduating around 6 to 7 month mark and getting pretty high paying jobs. But we also cater to students who, like those coming from retail and all. A lot of 36% of our students, came from retail food services, making $20,000 or less per year. And some of them had some college, but many of them are first in their family to even do any higher ed. And generally, we find that around the 12 to 14 month period is kind of ideal to train people up. And we're getting students at jobs making $50,000 to $70,000 $40,000, which is a lot of money for the Midwest. Literally, getting jobs that are paying as well as people coming out of a 4-year computer science program. And we do 2 things to make the program accessible. First is using an income share agreement, an ISA, which is this new, a lot of people are starting to talk about this new form of financing. So we prepay tuition for our students. And if they graduate Kenzie and do not make more than $40,000 a year, they walk away and owe us nothing. And we always say that, try doing that with a student loan.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, when they're successful, they pay it forward by contributing a percentage of their income for 4 years, and then they're done. So they don't pay into their 60s and 70s with all these things we're seeing with student loans.
Yeah.
So it's a short-term, kind of repayment, and that helps continue to make the program sustainable and allow us to support the student after that. The other challenge with non-traditional students is how do you, a lot of them cannot afford not to make a paycheck while they're training themselves. So through our partnership with Kelly Services, which is one of the largest staffing company in the country, we launched a very highly scalable Earn and Learn program. So every student enrolled at Kenzie today have access to a job that is designed around the school schedule that can be done remotely from home. I cannot name the company that we work with, but it's a pretty well-known company. And our students get to put that on their resume as well. But they make, they get paid way above minimum wage. So for many of them coming from retail, they get immediately a salary increase when they join Kenzie. And they also get trained on a lot of the soft skills and problem-solving skills.
That's great. That's very cool. So one of the things that I found really interesting in chatting with both of you prior to this is my experience previously with a lot of people I know that have gone through coding schools, and there are lots of coding schools that have popped up around the country, is if they're not competitive enough to, say, get accepted into Flatiron. I know someone who went to Flatiron in 2012, and they were extremely excited about it, and I know others who just decided to learn coding on the side, and there were no roles for them in their local market. In many smaller cities, there's a lack of jobs for people when they graduate if they don't have a placement program to work remotely for some company, or they aren't in a market that has an extreme need for those roles. And we, discussing this, talked a little bit about how your programs tend to be tailored to the specific markets that it's in, and you expand based on where there's an unmet need. Could you give some concrete examples of that? I think there's some really enlightening ones that could come out.
Yeah, I can start with a little bit on Washington, D.C. as an example. In D.C., there's a huge workforce there that is out of the military, and there's a lot of interest in analyzing data. So one of the programs that we're working on bringing to that market is data science, but we're also working with the Veterans Affairs Department, because there's a new bill that has just been passed, I think 30 days ago, that they're bringing to market. It's a $15 million fund specifically designed to train veterans in these kinds of programs, accelerated programs. It explicitly excludes four-year institutions because a lot of veterans have the ability to reskill really rapidly. So this program will provide full tuition funding as well as a living stipend for veterans. And that's an incredible opportunity in that market because there's so many consultancies and businesses that require security clearances to be able to deliver government contracts. And they can't get the technical talent with the security clearances. Even if they want to put somebody through the program, it can take a year, 2 years for somebody, and they just can't wait around for that in the job cycle. So we've had a number of employers who've come to us and said, if you can go get veterans that already have a security clearance and you can train them on the technical skills to do the jobs, we would pay for their training. So what's fascinating about this is you've got the government coming in providing funding and employers saying that they would do the funding because there's so much demand in that market for this kind of talent.
That's great. And I believe you had said something about DC was the first expansion market for Flatiron. but there were two others that you had mentioned, Florida and LA.
Yeah, so Florida and LA, those are markets where we're looking at bringing in UX, UI design programs. Those are very strong design communities. We wouldn't look at those as markets where we'd try to build an emphasis in data science, whereas it's incredibly necessary in Washington, D.C., given the employer demand. So we're always looking at what is the already existing businesses that are in that market, and how do we help solve the skills gap.
And Chok, why Indianapolis?
Well, many people don't know, there is a growing tech ecosystem in places like Indianapolis. One example is Indianapolis is actually the second largest Salesforce office outside of San Francisco because of their earlier acquisition of a company called ExactTarget, which was at that time the biggest acquisition exit for a Midwestern tech company. And that has spawned a lot of new startups and companies that have come up. The city is becoming kind of a SaaS business hub. So you're going to see more and more of these themes as you look around the Midwest and the South, where cities are developing their specialization. So in the case of Indianapolis, there's a lot of marketing and automation as well as SaaS businesses, and that's why we chose that, because there is a lot of jobs. There are 4,000 unfilled tech jobs at Marion County, which is where Indianapolis is. So our biggest challenge right now is we just can't train people fast enough to fill all those jobs. And when we look at places, when we continue to grow, when we look at Nashville, medical tech is growing rapidly. Kansas City, there are a lot of different cities that are developing specializations. So we're looking to offer programs that cater to what kind of jobs are available in those cities.
I think this ecosystem point is really interesting. As you know, we're sitting here in York, Pennsylvania, and thinking about economic development. That company that plants an anchor in the community has incredible power. And we've been expanding to cities across the United States for the past almost 2 years, and we can see it happening. It's that anchor, that seed that's so important with a company that plants and starts to build the technical talent, and those folks go on and they start other companies and they move to other companies, and that's how it builds. There's a company in New York City called ClassPass. I don't know if anybody's heard of it or familiar with it, but it's a tech startup, and they had built their entire business in New York City, but the CEO and founder had a real tie to Montana because it was a quality of life for him. Somebody from Montana is in the audience. And they started first building their services department in Montana as a lower cost opportunity to improve their margins. And then he was spending more and more time there, and gradually he said, I'm gonna move the whole company there. So he has built this anchored tenant in Montana, and he's now trying to draw technical talent in. So I think that's a really important part of how workforce development actually happens.
I think that goes back to what the speaker earlier, James, was talking about, which is one ingredient to make this work is the human connection. So having that person with ties to the Valley or New York City, with Montana and all this other Middle American heartland cities, that is what would spark a lot of this connections and business opportunities.
Fantastic.
And that's what we're trying to do as well with Kenzie. Our talent actually all started in Silicon Valley and New York. So we're able to hire, people who came from Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and then how do we then leverage those expertise to bring, the training to the heartland cities, but at the same time, through our network, how can we then attract more companies now to get drawn into the cities?
Definitely. So one thing that we haven't touched on yet was your experience before starting Kenzie. I'd like to hear that a little bit, because it's a really interesting case in economic development, and something that spawned your thought process around the Midwest and what could happen there.
Yeah. So if people are familiar with a company called Andela in Africa, we started a company called Agility, which was we call it the Andela of Southeast Asia. A couple years before Andela. We never raised any money, so therefore we had no PR. We were all totally under the radar, but we built it to 250 people, and it's highly profitable. And the whole model was that we went to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, to hire raw talent, So we have a mechanism to identify people who has that potential, and we train them up ourselves, and we pay them when we train them. We could do that there because wages are a lot more affordable. And then we get them on projects with a lot of US tech companies. So we do work for Google, we do work for Uber, and we work with 150 other startups today in Silicon Valley, New York, but around the world as well. And the reason we started that was 8 years ago, there was a big talent crunch in Silicon Valley. As companies were going IPO, a lot of the early stage startups were having trouble, similar to what you saw in New York. They were having trouble competing for tech talent. So we say, why don't let's create a new pool of talent somewhere else. And when you have that pool of talent, also technology was up and coming. So now we have better communication tools, productivity tools like Slack and everything. This really allows us to literally create talent elsewhere, but make them as productive as talent would be sitting in Silicon Valley.
Fantastic. And then what was the impetus behind founding Kenzie?
Well, to be honest, it was the election of 2017. So regardless of your political affiliation, it really opened our eyes. We were having, things were going great on the coast, and we quickly started to realize that actually the middle of the country were really struggling. And you don't see that when you're in this bubble of Silicon Valley or to some extent even New York as well. So instead of complaining about it, we saw that if we don't do something, it will get worse. With automation, people always say, all these manufacturing jobs are lost to China and India, to all these places. The truth of the matter is, between 2000 and 2010, 6 million manufacturing jobs were lost, and a lot of it was due to automation. It wasn't outsourcing to overseas. Companies today, because of technology and robotics and AI, can do a lot more with less. Just look at an Amazon fulfillment center. And so with the problem comes opportunity. So as a lot of the traditional jobs were automated away, a lot of new jobs are emerging. So the goal was, how can we create a new talent pool that are trained towards the skills that are needed today? But also one more thing is not just to teach them the skills, but also teach them the mindset. How do you learn how to learn? And how do you go towards this lifelong learning process so that people that goes through the Kenzie training can adapt to how the jobs are changing over the next 2, 3, 4 decades?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum came out with some really interesting reports about what's happening with automation right now. And they predicted that the shelf life of the skills that we have today, half of them will be gone in just 4 years or irrelevant. If you've looked at the McKinsey report that came out about a year ago, you'd see that they're forecasting in 10 years, we might see 30% of the jobs in the US labor force gone due to automation. I mean, it is a significant transformational period that we're in. But what's interesting about what you were just saying, Chok, is that in Iowa, where I'm from, my brother he runs a manufacturing company. And I'm talking all the time about technical training and education. And he says, we just can't hire enough people for the manufacturing plant. And so we're actually firing customers right now, our least profitable customers. I was like, this sounds crazy. How is that possible? And I said, you just need people to work on the plant floor. And he said, no. I need technical engineers who can work on the plant floor. There is no way for him to get the training programs that are provided into the location that he needs them. So he's actually been petitioning the local governor to help fund training programs and find a provider that can come in. So that's an amazing opportunity that we're just not positioned through our higher ed institutions to be able to train the workforce for the jobs that are there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because we have a lot of manufacturers here. We're a big manufacturing center in Pennsylvania, and there are a lot of issues not being able to hire enough employees, and a huge number of employment by those manufacturers is in age range that is likely to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. So something needs to happen to be able to fill the labor void there in order to be able to keep producing. And I know one of the things that John was hoping to talk about with this here, but an investor wanted to see his site during this, so he gladly took them over. One of the things that he's found with a lot of the companies that he works with is there are jobs at many of those manufacturers that are tasks that people regularly will everybody on the floor will draw straws that day to see which one has to do this one thing that's super repetitive and obnoxious, and maybe they have some old machinery that's able to do these things, but it's treating someone like a 1930s assembly line. And with some of the modern technology that's more about augmentation as opposed to automation, you can have a person operating 3 machines at the same time and really extend the ability of the American worker to produce more and fill those gaps, and as long as they're trained with the right skill set of the future. So this is a very important conversation that we're having here, and especially figuring out how to do the rapid retraining. That is going to be ever more necessary in the future. So I'd love to hear quick prognosis. What market are you not in that you would like to be in? Not that, I'm not asking what you're promising to expand to, but what market are you not in that you'd like to be in?
Florida. Very interested in Florida.
Which part?
All of it.
Okay. And Chok?
Either Kansas City or Detroit.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And with that, I'd love it if we could give them a warm round of applause as they depart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.